Hello, and welcome to Hanratty on Karate. As I mentioned in my last podcast, I was at a JKA competition. One thing I noticed is that they were insisting that JKA certified fist pads were to be used by everybody. And this got me thinking, because I'm not a fan of fist pads at all anyway. Being old school, I fought without fist pads for most of my competition career. Only the last few years I ever used them. And I thought I'd just go through how effective and what use fist pads are in traditional karate, for example. But no, they weren't used originally in Okinawa. As I say, they weren't used originally when I started karate and didn't come in till, 20 odd years later. So basically, what the purpose of a fist pad is to reduce injuries, right? And make things safer. Do they do this? They do, but only to a certain extent and in different ways. So I looked up if there'd been any studies done on the effectiveness of fist pads, and some of the findings, this was a Danish championship study, was done in 1983 to 86. It took 3 years of studying fist pads, and this is probably when they were first, showing up. It was found that hand injuries dropped dramatically, okay? Like 1.3% hand injuries with pads versus 11 to 12% without fist pads. So that was like, fingers, knuckles and stuff like that. But head injuries were less severe, but not an awful lot less severe. So head injuries were more common where pads were used because most likely fighters felt safer and struck more freely, but the injuries were less severe with pads. So you were still getting hit, but it wasn't as severe. And there was fewer fractures and fewer lacerations, which is kind of obvious, right? But overall, the injuries requiring medical treatment dropped slightly when pads were used, okay? This was in the British Journal of Sports Medicine. So the fist pads protect the striker's hands and effectively reduce serious injuries overall, but they may encourage slightly more head contact. All right, so these were the big pads, like the WKF, quite big pads. Where I'm going with this is JKA have introduced their own pads, and I wanted to see, because looking at them straight away, I thought they were slightly inferior to any pads that have gone before. Remember the old pads we just used to put over our knuckle with just an elastic band across the center of your palm, so you could still make a good fist, all right? So in 2020, they did a review of injury prevention in karate. They brought in mats before this, which I'm not a fan of mats at all. I've seen too many ankle injuries on mats, and although they may be helpful in the case of falls and throws, and sweeps and stuff, we always used hardwood floors and people got swept left, right and centre. You very rarely saw an awful lot of throws, but mostly sweeps. You learnt how to fall, usually throwing your foot up as you did so you could try to get something. But there's not an awful lot of trials. So basically what they did is they took all the protective gear in this 2020 review and they looked at knuckle pads, gloves, mouth guards and groin guards. But they all play a meaningful role in reducing injuries, okay? But it still lacks a lot of random trials. They just use existing evidence. And the existing evidence slightly supported the use of hand protection. But they found that injury protection would increase when it was combined with strict rule enforcement, conditioning programs, and, of course, education for athletes and coaches. So that was kind of like the study. So not all of the studies are karate specific. General biomechanics are clear. Padding increases the surface area, we know that. So it reduces the peak force on contact. Like if you're hitting with seiken, like your first two knuckles, which you should be doing, then, you've got a lot more power going into a smaller area. Well, you've got all your power going into a smaller area instead of it being distributed over a larger impact area. It protects the small bone of the hands, metacarpals and phalanges from fractures. Like me, I've got quite a few hand fractures from just not punching straight or person moving and catching the second two knuckles, like the little finger and next to it, and you can get breaks easily. I've had both hands broken out. It reduces skin lacerations for the attacker and the defender, although I found when we first started using the gloves, we tended to get more tears or more skin lacerations because they tended to grip and rip, all right? But apparently the studies said that just biomechanically, they do reduce that. And the other thing is it would encourage harder striking. Well, from what I've seen on the WKF, it doesn't really encourage harder striking, okay? So traditionally, you could argue that you're probably better off if you want to develop your karate for self-defense, producing power, getting cleaner, swifter, stronger techniques to the target you want, then you probably don't want to use gloves or you don't want to use pads. And I know whenever we do free sparring in our club, I always leave it up to the students. If you want your pads, you can. If you want your mouth guards, you can. Pretty much, I advise mouth guards, okay? So I don't think there was ever any pads used in Okinawan karate. There may be a hand wrapping like you use it in boxing, but I don't think there's much. But they do influence your training technique, your distance, and your training culture, okay? So, as I say, this came about because I was looking at these JKA certified gloves, mandated gloves, I believe they are now, because they want to try and control so that they've got a standard equipment certification right across the board, which is basically the same thing that WKF has done. They have an equipment certification. So the WKF approval, it guarantees standard padding, shape and safety. They have a certain amount of padding density, and the wrist stability is good because the straps ensure that the pad doesn't rotate or slip. Durability, not so much because you see a sell-by date on them, well, best-by date if you like, but they do have some integrity. Comfort and fit, they're not so comfortable for me, but you can get used to them. Now, what I found was they don't really allow you to make a full fist, and this is my problem with gloves. But I looked on a few comparisons with gloves, and most of the glove people who rate these on comparisons rate the WKF tags best, okay? Usually the SMAI WKF gloves come out the best in popularity. So WKF certified safety, and they consistently score well with padding uniformity, long-term durability, fit and wrist stability, and competition legality. So they fit all of the little boxes that you want. But I've still got some old-style gloves that we used to use in the KUGB around my dojo, and the kids love them. They like them because you can form a good fist. They'll quickly allow you to grab if you want to grab into a throw or a pull. But they still allow you to make a good fist, which the WKF do. You can't close your fist all the way into the palm. The fist is slightly rounded, knuckles are not sharply defined, so you lose that Seiken traditional karate punch, okay? But they're designed to reduce impact and concentration. So what are you going to do? So the fist can't close because there's a foam ridge under the fingers and a padded dome over the knuckles, and the strap system that keeps the glove from rotating around your wrist won't let you make a full fist. So you wouldn't want to use it in Makawara training, and you certainly couldn't use it in kata. It just doesn't look good in kata, right? But you can punch effectively for light point style, light touch, which is what the sport karate is. Then you look at the new JKA, and this is a general thing all over. And I talked to a few people, and they all got the same thing. They are not popular at all. They're less effective. They're not unsafe. They're just less protective and less functional than the WKF style gloves, which I'm not even a fan of them. But why? Well, I looked at them, and JKA pads use thinner foam, so there's more impact felt by the striker, more impact transmitted, and a higher risk of bruising. That's the most frequent complaint. The other thing is they restrict fist formation more than the WKF gloves. even though JKA emphasizes traditional Seiken, if you like, they have stiff internal bar, they prevent a tight, fully clenched fist, and they create a slightly open fist shape. So many senior instructors that I've talked to within the JKA find this contradictory to JKA's technical ideals, all right? They rotate more easily on impact because the wrist straps system is pretty flimsy, okay? The glove can twist, the knuckle alignment becomes inconsistent, and so your punching feels less stable. This is especially noticeable if you're doing fast Gyakuzuki exchanges. Other things, stitching loosens quickly, the foam compresses faster, so they become more dangerous because if your foam compresses, then of course you've got less protection. Also, the surface scuffs easily, okay? This is important too because if it's scuffing, you get a chance of tears and abrasions. They don't last as long as all of the others like SMAI or Arawaza or Shiredo. So the only reason they did it is they wanted to follow along with WKF and standardize their equipment right across the board, okay? Meaning maintaining a traditional look, smaller, less bulky. They could have just gone without, which would have been quite acceptable to everybody. Maybe not the insurance companies, and so maybe they're bowing down to them. I'm not sure. But from the feedback I got, many instructors say it's okay for light kumite, and in the dojo, they really let the people just use the WKF type gloves and put the JKA gloves only for official JKA events, okay? So the JKA pads, to go over it, are more restricted. They cannot fully clench. WKF gloves, they allow a more natural fist, but they're still padded. Minimal protection, more impact felt. Higher risk of bruising. They can rotate, and mixed foam compresses too quickly. They are closer in size to bare fist, but they're quite ugly looking gloves if you ask me. So that's my opinion on that. Now, if the JK want to standardize the equipment, I suggest that they should have done a little bit more research on what people want rather than dictating what people should do. But being the JKA, they won't do that. Anyway, if you're going to wear a glove, my advice would be use a WKF glove. It'll give you a more functional fist, it'll give you a lot more protection, and you'll feel a little bit better with it. And it probably lasts longer, and JK things are falling to pieces. So that's just my opinion on JKA trying to standardize their equipment across the board. It'd be interesting to see if they come up with shin pads and other stuff. I know in Japan, when I attended competitions in Japan, the kids wear some neat-looking helmets, but that's another thing I have about kids wearing helmets. The helmets that they have, they look like Formula One helmets, to be honest with you. I don't think that adding any weight to a kid's head when they don't have fully formed neck muscles is a good idea. And you see kids as young as 4 and 5 years old wearing these helmets. It really makes you think. I mean, they look good. They're extremely protective against strikes. But what they're doing to the neck muscles, I'm not sure. I'd like to see a little bit of research done on that. And they seem to be, I wouldn't say JKA standard in Japan, but certainly JKS standard. I attended a competition there a few years ago. Not the last time I was in Japan. This one was just before COVID. I was visiting Yahara's dojo, and then I went up and was invited to a competition run by Kokobon. Really nice guy. They're a massive competition, something like 1,600 competitors. You had little kids there, sometimes 3 or 4, doing a beautiful kata. And then the kumite, they all put these bloody great helmets on. And of course, they had big, thick fist pads as well. Now, there probably wasn't any head contact allowed, but it didn't mean to say, just because you don't allow it, doesn't mean to say it won't happen. Given that, you don't want to increase the weight in your head and not do something about the neck muscles, support the neck muscles proportionally. Anyway, that was in Japan, but I've never seen them used here. We do see kids with helmets on here, and I'm not a big fan of it at all. Okay, so that's it for now. I'd like your opinion on it. Tell me what you think. Thank you.